All right, so let's get started. So, hello everyone. My name is Najla. I am a director of engineering at a company called Aligned. I'm calling in from Berlin, Germany, and I'm also an engineering leadership coach. And I'm really excited to have this panel today. This panel is going to be about 45 minutes, where the panelists and I are going to discuss some questions, but we're also really open to you writing in questions in the chat. So please get those in and I'll try to weave those in. And if anybody has any questions at the end, we'll all head over to the Lead Dev Slack in the panel Q&A channel, which I'll remind us of at the end. So first, let's get started with introducing the rest of our panelists. I'm going to start with Dave. Dave, hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the short introduction. I'm Dave. I manage two site reliability teams here at PagerDuty, responsible for everything from CI/CD tooling to our Kubernetes clusters and core networking, et cetera. And I also manage our developer experience function here as well.
Thanks, Dave. Arjit?
Thanks, Nasla. So yeah, I'm Arjit. I am a senior engineering manager with Delivery Hero in Berlin as well. So I lead the engineering for the quick commerce side, and I'm here to talk about incidents. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about incident response. So yeah, I'm here to talk about that today.
And last but not least, Spencer.
Hey everybody, my name is Spencer. I'm the CTO at Privy. We do marketing automation and email and SMS, and I've spent a lot of time both in and managing incidents. Excited to talk with you all.
Great. So yeah, the title of this panel is called Get Smarter with Every Incident, and we have a nice group of panelists here with a variety of experience. And urgency really keeps systems alive during an incident. That's kind of the baseline level that we're all used to operating in. But when that really becomes the sustained default, teams get stuck in firefighting, burnout occurs, and yeah, we not don't necessarily resolve the underlying problem. So we're going to get into that today, how to break out of those loops, how to go from reactivity to actually maybe fixing some things in the on-call systems and where AI is involved. That's a pretty hot topic right now. So first, I want to start with Spencer. Spencer, can you talk about how you're using AI to catch early warning signs and tune alerts?
I think this is the dominant topic, really, of the year and probably the last several years, and it's pervading every part of software engineering. And so, when we start to think about incidents, it's natural and inevitable about how we can use AI to support those incidents, how to detect things earlier. And I think that's one of the areas that we've really been focused at Privy is figuring out how we can use AI tools. And we're really using the tools we already use, which have a lot of these kind of AI layers built into them. For us, our stack is New Relic and Sentry and PagerDuty. Shout out to Dave's team. But things like Sentry right now have a lot of the AI tools already built in. And so we can turn those on. And one of the ones that we use right now is anomaly detection. And it's cool, but there's a lot of anomalies. And I think one of the challenges for us is figuring out how do we tune the error detection or this kind of AI alerting so that we are not over alerting, that we're not creating a bunch of noise for our team. And that's something we haven't nailed yet. I think for us, we are still defaulting to, right now we're defaulting to a lot of these AI tools to notify rather than page. And so that's our default. That's the kind of, I guess, the pragmatic choice we have made is that until we figure that the right way to tune these tools, we'll notify. So we'll, notify our operational Slack channel. But if it's 3 a.m. and we get an anomaly detection, at least right now, unless our other monitoring tools also go off, we're not going to be paging the engineer on call.
I,
Yeah, uh, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I'm going to try not to talk too much about PagerDuty, but in terms of AI, how AI fits into incident management, it's something we've been thinking about for a long time, starting with like the basics, like how do we use AI to group alerts so that we reduce the noise. But I think a lot of it comes down to when you want to apply AI to this problem, no matter how good the AI is, it starts with the data set it has access to. So if you aren't at the beginning of the pipe, if you aren't cautious or in some way discerning about which events you're sending to the AI to build its data set from, then its output is going to be noisier for you too. So if you're sending everything from staging, from a development environment, from prod to the same place, then it's going to start anomaly detecting things for you and say like, hey, this is a problem, even though it might not actually be a problem that impacts is worth waking you up for or is customer impacting. So I think some of it has to be in partnership with the AI itself. Yeah, you have to find a good way to give it the data that then is going to result in the outputs that you need, if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you. And you can continue, Dave, because so that was like pre-incident. I'm curious for once we're in the middle of an incident and you have to triage, how are you triaging? What's slowing you down the most? And how are you like leveraging tools or practices to get context more quickly during an incident?
This, I hate to start to answer a question with it depends, but the one thing that I think that matters in terms of when you're triaging is it we like to say, is it new and novel or is it well understood? Because I think the way you triage an incident depends on, if it's well understood, you probably already have existing run books and automation and best practices to kind of reduce the time it takes to resolve the particular incident. So I'm not necessarily going to spend a ton of time talking about that, but I'm going to assume something's new and novel because those are the ones that take up the more brain space. So like the other part is where is your triage occurring? Is it via Zoom call? Is it via in Slack or some other, like where, because what you want to do is bring the information and the tools to the responder to the place where they're working. So like, are they able to access all these things in one place, or do they have to open 17 tabs, or like have a bunch of things open on their desktop that they have to be looking at the same time? Or this is my ambivalent feelings about dashboards too. I think dashboards are great, but also they can be overwhelming. Like I think you need to cut down people's reliance on dashboards and give them more like a refine. And this is where again AI can help too, is like give them the data and the context at their fingertips. And then lastly is how can you reduce the number of humans required for resolution? And I don't mean that in an AI sense, but like if you have an incident where you need to bring in 15 people, that's already a problem, right? Like how can you get it down to where you only need like one or two people, or even like some automation to help out the one person that's there. So I think reducing the friction to triage is the key, and it could be, but the friction comes in many forms. So I think you have to analyze where it is specifically for your organization or your team.
Can I add on to this a little bit? Because I love Dave's answer. And I think one of the things that we've noticed at Privy and in some of my previous roles is that having very specific roles for responders can help a lot with triage. If everybody who's involved is actively researching a different thread and there's nobody who's coordinating and nobody who is kind of, recontextualizing the information that's coming in, it's really easy to have the entire team heads down for maybe longer than your entire budget to get things back online. And engineers who go heads down on triage, on an investigation, it's really good to be able to leave them in that mode and have somebody else who's operating at like an incident commander level or a scribe level or something else. And I think that's something that a lot of bigger companies have established really great culture around. But if you're operating with a smaller team, even though you may only have, 3 or 5 or 10 engineers, being able to separate those roles and identify who is responsible for what during an incident can, greatly speed up the overall response.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I would definitely also like concur exactly to what Spencer was saying. So, for example, for us also internally, we try to have like let's say the incident commander role itself between different parts of the org. So your fintech incident commander is speaking to your logistics incident commander. So that way, essentially, you reduce the number of nodes of different people talking to each other. So at least there are specific directed roles and like a lot more streamlined flow for these incidents rather than a lot of noise.
Yeah, thanks, Arjit. And yeah, let's hear more from you. So the last part of this is after an outage. So or an incident, like, can you talk about why we see the same problems come up over and over again, and how you move from just like reacting to the same problem to actually learning and actually changing what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think one part of the problem is like this, we see the same problems because sometimes we treat post-incident reviews more like a confession space rather than experiments. And what I mean by that is like teams genuinely write like good postmortems. They're like there's clear action items, we have owners, but then those action items sort of start competing with your roadmap. And then they get deprioritized. And then a couple of months later, we see the same incident or like a variation of that incident with different people. And then we are left wondering why didn't we learn? So one thing that sort of worked with our part of like the org that where we are, where we started, like we were like, okay, let's treat these post-incident learnings like actual features and not always as tech debts. So we've changed our whole flow from
Mm.
what should we fix to is there like the smallest thing that I can do to make this less painful next time? So, like if an action item in your incident report is move this database X to Y, it's a great action item, but it's not gonna get prioritized because it requires you getting sponsorship from your leadership, from product, and all of that. So, like, what's the smallest thing that you can sort of do to make it less painful? So, I think that helped. And then figuring out if there is repetition of certain incidents. So we like how do you do like not just another postmortem, but like more like a deeper architectural review that hey, we are seeing a lot more incidents from this part of the system. Is there something that we need to think about a little more in depth, or is that something which is something else needs attention there? And I think one other thing that has also worked out well for us is just thinking about how many or how often is someone getting paid outside business hours, because we need to like figure out like active capacity so that there is a remediation happening, right? Because if our action items like keep on getting stalled in Jira, then our on call also gets stuck in Slack and PagerDuty and everywhere else. So I think that was one of the biggest breakthrough for us to stop treating some of these things as nice to haves and more along the lines of this is how we want to prevent the next outage that essentially breaks the user's trust in us. And that sort of helped.
That's great, Arjit. And because I'm passionate about this, I'll also add that, like, yeah, if you treat, like, if you have access to PagerDuty, you have a roadmap of work that you can now pursue to fix underlying issues. It's just like when you have an app and you go inside Crashlytics and you say, "What's my top crash caused by?" Okay, great. If you fix that one thing, you've made progress, and you can treat pages the same way. Like, which alert went off the most in the last 3 months, in the last quarter, and if I tackle that one thing, how much burden am I going to reduce off the entire team, operationally and also in the tech and for customers? Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, so one thing that I think is helpful, and this is coming kind of from the leadership side of things, but I think one of the responsibilities of a senior or more senior engineer is to learn how to advocate for the work that needs to be done. It's not enough just to understand that it needs to be done. It's not enough to create a ticket for it. You kind of have to learn how to talk the business language to be able to explain why something is important. And maybe you're selling that to your manager, who's then going to sell it to a product team or to a leadership team. But learning how to be really articulate about both I guess, the pain or the impact of leaving a situation as it is. And that can be cost to the roadmap, that can be distraction of engineers, that can be burnout, that can be, product experience. There's all kinds of different areas where there's impact in this. But it's not the manager's job. It's not, it is my, job as a CTO, but I also push that back onto the engineers who really have the context about why something is happening over and over again, or, the reason that we need to fix it. And it's really your job as an engineer to be able to make the case for why we should work on something.
Dave?
I could spend days talking about this subject because it's really interesting, but a few years ago, we went through a revamp internally of how we handle post-incident actions, which I think was really successful. But one thing that we discovered was it was a local optimization, meaning within the incident itself, we were actually pretty good about tackling the high priority items afterwards. But what was missing, and what I think I want, I'm also open to ideas on this is, what about patterns? What about things across the major incidents? Like who's looking at like systemic things that are coming across that may be not within the local of that one incident, but maybe recurring across these incidents as well. And I think that's something that sometimes those are the big ones, right? Like, because you can look at the incident itself, and often, yeah, maybe it was a major outage, but usually there's something, it's tying back to something else. And that's the other thing. You have to not just look for the small ticket, like, which is really important, but like, what is the big pattern that we need to tackle architecturally that may prevent some of these incidents from occurring in the future?
Yeah, that's great. And I want to move to a question from the audience. I think it was you, Dave, that mentioned dashboards and like all this information. So Florian, hi Florian, asks, one key factor in dealing with incidents is live business metrics. Any learnings you'd like to share on how you came up with or used a business metric in a novel way?
Ooh, that's a, I, I think ideally, and I don't know if we're there yet, but ideally, you if it's a business problem, then you should have some easy way to discern like tie your outage to an ARR, right? Like see like what's the revenue impact of the thing that's happening right now, and who's being impacted? Is it like our crown jewel customers? Like is there, depending on if you have sharding or if you have like some sort of this, how where is the impact and who is it impacting? And I'm not saying, practically speaking, like all customers are great, but some customers are more valuable than others to your business, right? So like I think that's the end goal would be to, and it's hard to get, right? Because you need distributed tracing, you need to have some sort of like account linking, and it's very complicated. But I think ultimately that is the goal. And in the meantime, I think you can probably use like some sort of substitute uh, kind of metrics in between. So if it's not the customer ID, it's something else that's related to customers. But ultimately, it's about the end users. It's about what is the customer impact. So that is the thing I'll be focusing on. So because if your CPU on one of your clusters is at 100%, but there's like it doesn't it's there's no customer impact, then it's not. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but it's not an urgent problem to solve. So I think that's the thing I've seen change over time, is like from the Nagios days of like I got a peg CPU, I got to fix it, to now people are thinking more in terms of customer impact.
Hardship?
Yeah, I mean, completely agreed with Dave. Like if you see something like a 5% error rate, you're like, okay, sure, not great, but also not catastrophic. But if you see like, oh, 100 customers are impacted, now suddenly that is a different story, right? So it's more along the lines of just figuring out what is your like what's the easiest way for you to figure out your blast radius, like some sort of a blast radius dashboard in terms of your actual impact in terms of business or customers. Because like yeah, 100% CPU like shouting at you, you're like, okay, sure, there is something I need to do, but is it actually impacting? You probably don't know. So yeah.
And just to add on one last thing to this, but there are tools that allow you to instrument this so that the tool itself will tell you how many different customers have experienced a particular error or particular bug. And you can set thresholds for alerting if, the bug is experienced or if the error is experienced by, whether it's number of users, whether it's number, if you tenant by customer or something like that. But as long as you have the ability to identify which end user was affected by an error, or what is the meta information that caused that, you can build a lot of instrumentation that will allow you to notify on this very specifically and to cause a page if a threshold is breached.
Thank you all. I'm gonna take another audience question. This one is very fun. How do you get your engineers excited about SRE and putting the effort into aspects like monitoring?
Can I jump in here on this one for a second?
Yes,
So
please.
I don't know if I have an answer for the first part, because not everybody loves being on the front line. But for the second part, my answer is that everybody is responsible for keeping the app online. Everybody needs to be responsible for monitoring, for operations, for those kinds of things. And the way that I have done that in my last several organizations is everybody's on call and you share an on-call rotation. And when you're on call, well, you start to learn to care about things like monitoring and logs and alerting because it affects your life on a day-to-day basis. And so those things do start to get better when everybody has the responsibility. On the excitement side, harder to assign that. So I don't know if Arjit or Dave have ideas on how to drive
I
that.
agree with everything you said because I think it's more self-preservation than excitement. Like, how many times do you want to be woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Like, it's not healthy for you. And it's not, frankly, it's not healthy for the business because if you're getting woken up, presumably some customers being impacted.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've honestly stopped trying to get them excited about monitoring, and I've moved from excitement to more like just making them angry about not having it. Like Dave said, right? If you wake up at 3 a.m. and you're like, oh, I wish there was that dashboard which would have told me how many customers are getting impacted. Now you are angry. You want to go and figure that out because you spent 1 hour waking up at 3 a.m. just to find something, which if that would have existed, would have taken you 5 minutes to figure out if this is a real issue or not. So I think at least for me, I've moved a little away from excitement after failing around it, and now more along the lines of how to get some emotion out of it.
You'll also build better tools when you're building them out of need rather than building them out of theory. If you have a team that's just responsible for building all of your internal tools, you'll end up with some really great tools and a bunch of tools that nobody ever uses because they were built with some theoretical backing rather than as a response to a particular pain point.
I guess the perennial question is how do you get an engineer excited about anything? But we'll save that for another panel. Um, okay, so let's see. Arjit, when does on-call fatigue stop being an individual problem and become a systemic one? And then how do you work with that?
I mean, I think like on-call fatigue sort of becomes systemic the moment like you hear one person or like a bunch of engineers talking about that being a factor in their decisions, in their career decisions, in the projects they're thinking about, or just their fatigue itself, right? I think a lot of people get caught up in, oh, we would do like a full-fledged burnout survey or a retention metric or some of that. But I mean, your signals can be soft, your signals can be small that, hey, people are talking about it, they're thinking about not taking up a project, not being on a team, or just being tired of it. And I think, I mean, that is where the question around like just the fairness of how do you improve some of this on call, right? And like your second question, how do we improve the systemic part of it? I'd say one, we need to figure out like, are your engineers getting paged multiple times in a single on-call shift? And I think if they're getting multiple times paged in a single night itself, people are already starting to dread their on-call week and like some sort of a recovery time. And then are your incidents even predictable that it's a deployment change or it's a config change, or is it random where you will have to bring in 10 teams to figure something out? Because those are the ones that take a lot more out of you. And like that sort of starts compounding your fatigue and creates that helplessness, right? So I think for us, what has sort of worked is like, of course, we improve on tooling, but like also just acknowledging that sustainable on call means that like sometimes it will impact, of course, your sleep and everything else. But is that like distributed well enough, or is there like good enough cognitive load distribution? And if that's not the case, and like I think Spencer was saying out, if you need 20 people in an incident to resolve something, you have a lot more deeper systemic issues rather than the lack of a particular tool or one person not being involved.
Yeah, and I was actually curious. This is something that we discussed prior to the call, how in places like Germany, you actually cannot mandate that everybody is on call, like Spencer is doing in his org. And I'm American, so I've now worked in both ecosystems, and it's fascinating. So I'm curious, like if anybody has insights on, you know, on how to work with that constraint?
I mean, I'm in Germany right now, so I can probably at least
Yeah.
take some part of it. And I think which is where exactly your question becomes even more important, Ashla, because you have to have better systems in place. You cannot be firefighting all the time if you have a limited pool of engineers also there. So like you have to, at some point in time, you have to sit down and like, hey, do we need to invest in SLOs? Is a 2% CPU higher than CPU threshold worth bringing an engineer into this? And like letting them spend time on this, or is this going to auto resolve in 15 minutes? So I think you start thinking about things in a lot more longer fashion, because you cannot use all of your engineers as a defense mechanism to all the different alerts that are happening. And I think that like as an example, last year at some point in time we had only 3 people in our rotation, and this was still covering like a bunch of services. Now within 3 of us, if we have to take care of 7 or 8 different services, we cannot be reacting to everything. So you pick your battles carefully, and then you navigate that. And then the other part of it is you figure out what is causing people to not be a part of on call, because these are services that they are maintaining. And that is the part which is a systemic issue, which you tend to like help them resolve, build SLOs, build confidence, tell them that this work is appreciated. It's not extra burden work that you or your manager are just piling on these people, right? Let compensate people if possible, right? If monetarily or by comp offs or whatever things are applicable in your company. So at least for us, there is monetary compensation. And then if you're on call for a longer night or for a weekend, then you can of course talk to your manager, get a day off, like figure those things out. Because if it's not appreciated, you're not going to have a healthy set of people who are going to be interested in doing this.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I guess on a similar note, like when we don't have that constraint, like Spencer, you have everyone on call, but even though everyone's on call, you might still implicitly like over rely on certain people to be the fixers, not just rather than the triagers. So as your team is scaling, since you work at a startup, how are you preventing that reliance on like a certain number of engineers while maintaining strong ownership?
It's a tough question to answer because I think the reality is that certain engineers do tend to establish themselves as the experts for systems, for databases, for the types of things that tend to break when you have an incident. It's rarely a front end component that's acting in a really mysterious way. It's, usually something to do with the connection between distributed systems or, a load that is higher than you were anticipating, which tends to be, a few engineers. I think the main thing for me is for those engineers that tend to find themselves in, let's call it like linchpin situations where they are the one engineer who knows. I try to work with that engineer to make one of their particular goals to spread that knowledge. So for me, it's like a three-step system. You start off as the expert, you're the linchpin, you're the person who really has to be looked at to fix. And I think it's inevitable that you will have situations like that on your team. I don't think you can just permanently avoid that because creating new software, creating new systems tends to involve somebody doing something either novel or something that the rest of the team doesn't know, from day one. But then the job is to then go from being a linchpin to, let's say, a knowledge sharer. You bring other people into that. So, as a leader, I try to assign different people to the same systems. So maybe I have somebody who's the Stripe or the billing or the subscriptions expert. The next time we have a small project there, I'm going to assign somebody who is not that person, not because it will get done faster, but because we will start to spread that knowledge. And I think being willing to take a slight penalty in velocity in order to avoid having the exact same people responsible for a single system can be helpful. And then you can move from being, let's
Mm.
say, a knowledge sharer to being a multiplier. And I think that's really the end goal for a lot of these really generally more senior engineers is how do you move from linchpin to ultimately knowledge sharer to then multiplier where you're not just spreading the knowledge of what you've done, but you're enabling other people to create systems in a similar way.
Thank you. I'm going to take another question from the audience that I love. So I'm going to paraphrase this one. Uh, this person is asking, how do you treat the first occurrence of an incident because in their experience, and this has also been my experience, um, they take it to like leadership or product manager, and the person replies, "Well, how likely is this to reoccur?" Um, and it's usually hard to answer because incidents are inherently unpredictable. So, how do you usually answer that? How do you treat that first occurrence and like maybe provide the right level of risk to a stakeholder that doesn't really understand how systems inherently work? And usually they're looking for the answer of like, oh, it's low probability, so I don't have to fix it. That's what they want to hear. Uh, how do you work with that?
The first thing that comes to my mind here is this is really about trade-offs. It's about risk analysis. And I don't even know if the frequency or the likelihood of something recurring is the most important metric or the most important factor here. But if it does recur, what is the impact to the business? Is it going to mean is the system has a major outage and is down for many customers or for the entire customer base? If so, even a very small chance of recurrence is probably worth addressing. If it's a minor nuisance and you don't think it's going to recur, I think there can be a business case to either deferring or I mean, honestly, I like a wait and see approach sometimes. Maybe you don't know how likely it is that something's going to recur, and it's not that big of a deal. And so you do say, we're going to defer this, but if it happens again next week, then we're going to put some time on the calendar and make sure that we fix this.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with Spencer. And I think I also feel like the probability of reoccurrence is sort of a misleading question. Like it's one of those things that should I get a fire insurance, but my house has never caught fire, right? Like, I mean, you're not going to get a fire insurance after the house catches fire. So I feel like the conversation needs to be like, what did this incident cost you? And sometimes the cost of the fix versus the cost of if this happens again, right? That is a simpler trade-off. Like, because the fix could mostly be a lot more cheaper than bringing 20 engineers into an incident call, managers, directors, whatnot. And if you literally like start figuring out the cost of managing that incident, you realize, you know what, the fix is probably much cheaper rather than doing the whole shebang.
Yeah, that's great. I think in general, sometimes we end up in a state of paralysis over analyzing when just doing the thing would be the faster thing and make everybody feel better also. So it's a great point. Um, I want to ask a little bit about leadership. So Spencer already mentioned a little bit of like what needs to happen after an incident to make space. Dave, I'm curious to hear from you. Like, what else do you think engineering leaders should be doing differently to make on-call sustainable? How do they protect remediation time? How do they stand up for their teams and the people that are actually trying to improve these systems and the on-call process? Especially like when we all have a bunch of planned roadmap work that we have to negotiate.
This is tough because I think this is, as leaders, it's always a problem, right? Because you have a people issue, right? If especially when you're close to burnout for a team or when you're seeing a lot of on call. But and even though it is a human problem, I think you need to frame it as a business problem. So because that's essentially, and it's not to say that leadership is unempathetic or not human, but you need to, when you're talking about trade-offs and you're talking about investments, you need to understand what the cost could be to the business. So to me, if half my team is burned out, I can actually quantify that with metrics in terms of like, hey, if the attrition happen, if this kind of attrition happens, this is the impact of the projects that and deliverables that we're going to have. So I'd like to prevent that. Or if my team is getting paged a lot, that's not just a human problem. That also implies that our systems are unstable. So what is the customer impact of that? So what you can do is actually put an argument together that's based on business value and business outcomes, and that then feeds into actually helping fix the human problem. Because if you just go and say like my engineers are burned out, it's not. I mean, if someone was coming to me, I would be really sympathetic to that. But it's hard because then, Spencer, you're a CTO. You're probably talking to your product counterparts all the time. You're probably talking to the CEO, and they're giving you pressure for like, hey, I want to, we got this product stuff to release over here. And so if you're not able to make the case at that level, then I don't think you're going to get the outcomes that you need. But I think you can make the case at that level because the burnout actually does lead to business issues, and instability actually does lead to business issues. But that's the level you need to be talking about when you're making those arguments, in my opinion.
Yeah, anyone else have thoughts on leadership's role in all of this?
I think, and I'll look at myself here, but certainly if you're in an executive seat, you do share responsibility for making sure that you are advocating for things that will help your team work in a sustainable way. And, while I do look to my engineers, senior engineers, staff engineers, et cetera, to help me make that case, ultimately, I think it is, the leadership's responsibility to, avoid putting engineers in a situation where they're going to burn out. Or avoid putting people, Arjit talked about multiple pages within the same on-call rotation. And like, do you have a contingency plan for what happens if you have an incident that is recurring several times in a row? Can you run rotation early? Is there a way to do that so that you don't have the exact same people responding day after day? One of the things that we'll do is for our known busy periods, we work in e-commerce and marketing. So Black Friday, Cyber Monday, some big holidays, they're just busier. They're higher stress. We have the highest load we'll have for the entire year. So we have a different on-call rotation. It's more like, I think it's a 24-hour rotation rather than a week-long rotation for those periods because it's much more stressful. And if you just draw the wrong straw and you happen to end up with the worst on-call rotation, that's not great. So I think it's really business to business, but can you analyze the different patterns for your business and come up with something that doesn't, randomly put people in a situation that they're much more likely to be stressed or to, have a lot of higher stress incidents.
Okay, I'm gonna take this might be our last question. Let's see. For another one from the audience. So, incidents affect reputation and trust. How do you maintain that trust with your customers after an incident? Um, do you call out your vendors in the, I'm not sure what RCA stands for, sorry. Maybe
Root
someone
cause
else does.
analysis, I think, maybe.
Oh yeah, okay. Acronyms are hard. Okay, do you call out your vendors? What other techniques do you use to maintain trust?
I have I have opinions about this. First off, never call out your vendors. You made the choice to select that vendor, right? That's your responsibility. So ultimately, yes, they may have contributed to whatever it is that you did, but you made that choice, right? So, you don't abdicate responsibility by handing it off to someone else. I feel pretty strongly about that. And secondly, I think be transparent. You know, I think that I was pretty proud. We had a really significant incident back in end of August, beginning of September, and I was really proud of how we and the team came together to publish probably our best postmortem doc that we have in like the last 4 years. And we just decided to approach it from a very transparent and technically rigorous perspective. So we had like five, I was in a room with like principal and staff engineers saying like how much do we want to describe about the way our systems look, and we just said let's do everything we can. Like let's be honest about what broke, how our architecture is, like where the failure points were here, and what we're going to do to fix it next time. I think that transparency and honesty actually helps build trust because I know that I feel the same as someone who manages a lot of vendors. That's how I feel when I want to see a post-mortem doc or an incident review from one of my vendors. I don't want to see just like two sentences saying kind of like, oh, kind of papering over it. I want to see here's a real technical issue we ran into, and here's how we're going to prevent this from happening again.
Thanks. Arjit?
Yeah, I mean, huge plus one to Dave. I mean, from a customer point of view, I don't think the customers don't actually care whose fault it was. They care whether if you are going to let that happen again. If you go ahead and write in your like incident that, hey, you know what, AWS went down and that is what happened. It's the same problem that from the customer's perspective, they have a contract with you, not AWS. So AWS going down, sure, it's your problem, not their problem. So I do think like completely huge plus one to Dave. And that is exactly how I feel. So they have basically put in your trust to have resilient systems. And vendors are always going to be imperfect. So that's not something you can probably escape.
I'll add not to Dave and Arjit's answer, which was perfect. Don't call out your vendors. But it's really important to build relationships if you're on the engineering side with the go-to-market counterparts. And I think one of the most important things you can do to build trust is to learn how you communicate incidents, downtime, other unexpected scenarios directly to the affected customers. And so for Privy, we have what we call support on call or support alert. I can't remember what it's called. It's in our Slack channel, and we will tag our support alert team anytime there's something that affects customers. And the goal is not that we have pager duty and that, support is on this on-call rotation, but more that as we get into a spot where we're actually trying to communicate the impact or the expected duration or something like that to somebody who is affected by the incident, that engineering can describe it however we will. We're going to use engineering terms, and then it can be translated by a customer success rep who has a relationship with that customer already. We also have a status page and those kinds of things, but we found that generally, especially more complex or ongoing incidents, it's much better to have just that one-to-one communication, either from our support team, and we'll measure an incident by support volume as well. So when we have an incident, it's like, okay, well, how many tickets have we had about this? And for any real incident, you see that support volume start to go up. So really important to be able to enable your support team or empower your support team to give good answers that don't beat around the bush, but also, you don't reveal confidential information. And the more you can do to help that group out, the better.
Yeah, and I think just to round that out, I'll say that what Spencer just said is where, showing accountability and ownership is where you can shine as a leader. That really separates like managers from true leadership. Um, we have one more amazing question, but we're not going to have time to answer it. And so please take it to the chat. Oh wait, actually we have 2 more minutes, so I'll throw it out for someone to give a lightning round answer. What do you consider a good ratio of on-call engineers to application, domain, etc.?
I mean, I'd say 6 to 8 engineers is probably okay, but it's more about like if you are an engineer who's touching that system every single day and you're on call once in every 2 months, it's probably fine. But if you're an engineer who touches that particular system once in 6 months and you're on call every 2 months, that basically means you're literally relearning the system again during your on call shift, right? So I think it's also a little more tied to how frequently you work on that system and how frequently are you on call for that system.
And I think also has to do with how operationally excellent your team is and how well maintained the services are. Because I gotta have a team with 8 people on it with 40 services, and on-call is quiet because you're proactively taking care of those issues ahead of time. So I think it's really hard to say in the abstract that there's a magic number. I think you could have like a one team of 8 people with one service, and that service is paging you every day, like 7 times a day, then that's bad, right? So I think it really depends.
I'll take
Yeah,
this from
totally.
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna wrap up, but if you have any last thoughts, Spencer.
I was just going to take this from the other side, which is I think it's important to have enough people on call that the rotation isn't every other week, or something that's unsustainable. So I would rather
Mm.
have a rotation that has responsibility for, say, a wider surface area of services and has enough people that you're not on call more than, let's say, one out of every 6 weeks, than one where everybody has a really deep knowledge of everything that they are operating and you're on call every other week.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think our friend Simon who asked this question, if you have like a more specific question about your scenario, great thing to bring up in the Slack channel as well, and you can get like real advice from this group. So thank you all so much for the good insights. I definitely learned some things. So we're gonna head over to the panel Q&A channel in Slack. We just messaged it in the chat in case you didn't catch that. And yeah, please head over there to continue the discussion. Thank you for joining. Thank you for our panelists, and have a great day. Bye.